It was a Tuesday morning when people at Riverside Park first noticed something unusual. Around 9 o'clock, they saw an elderly woman pushing what looked like a small piano on wheels. She was maybe in her late 60s, with gray hair tied back. In a simple bun, and wearing a faded blue cardigan that had seen better days, the woman struggled a bit with the weight of the piano, stopping every few steps to catch her breath. A couple of joggers slowed down, wondering if they should help, but she waved them off with a gentle smile. She seemed determined to do this on her own. She wheeled the piano to a spot near the old fountain, right where the morning sun created the perfect patch of light and shade. The piano wasn't fancy at all. It was an old upright with chipped paint and keys that had turned slightly yellow from years of use. But when she sat down on the small bench she had brought and placed her fingers on the keys, something magical happened. The first notes that came out were soft and sweet. It was a melody most people recognized but couldn't quite name. Within minutes, a small crowd began to gather. There was something about her playing that made people stop whatever they were doing and just listen. A mother pushing a stroller paused on the walking path. An old man feeding ducks by the pond looked up from his bag of breadcrumbs. Even the park's maintenance worker, who was busy picking up trash, stopped and leaned on his broom to listen. But here's what made it really interesting. The woman didn't have a hat out for money. She didn't have a sign explaining who she was or why she was there. She just played, completely focused on the music. As if the growing crowd around her didn't exist at all, her playing was beautiful, but it was more than that. Each song seemed to tell a story. When she played something slow and sad, people found themselves thinking about loved ones they had lost. When she switched to something cheerful and upbeat, children who had been walking with their parents started dancing on the grass. One young mother later said, it was like the woman could read the mood of everyone around her and play exactly what they needed to hear in that moment. As the morning turned into afternoon, more people discovered the mysterious pianist. Office workers on their lunch breaks sat on nearby benches, eating sandwiches while listening to classical pieces they had only heard in movies. Teenagers, who usually had earbuds glued to their heads, actually took them out to listen to this real, live music happening right in front of them. The woman played for hours without taking a real break. Sometimes she would pause between songs, flex her fingers, or take a sip from a water bottle she kept beside the bench. But mostly she just played song after song, her weathered hands moving across the keys like she had been doing this her whole life. What struck people most was her face while she played. There was joy there, the kind of happiness that comes from doing something you truly love. But there was also something else, something deeper and more complicated. It was like she was holding on to something precious, afraid it might slip away. If she stopped playing, the park's groundskeeper, a friendly man who had worked there for over 10 years, had never seen anything like it. He had seen plenty of street performers come and go, but this was different. This woman wasn't performing for tips or attention. She was playing like her life depended on it. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd kept changing. People would come and listen for a while, then leave to continue their day. But new people kept arriving, drawn by the sound of piano music floating through the park. Some stayed for just one song. Others sat on the grass for an hour or more. A war veteran who visited the park, every day to deal with his own troubles, found himself drawn to her music. He usually avoided crowds, but something about her playing made him feel calm in a way he hadn't felt in years. He started timing his daily walks to coincide with her performances. An elderly woman who had been coming to the park alone since her husband died 6 months ago found comfort in the music. She would bring a small folding chair and set it up where she could see the pianist's hands moving across the keys. The music reminded her of the old songs she and her husband used to dance to in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. Even the local coffee shop owner started paying attention. This little cafe was just across the street from the park, and he could hear the piano music through his open windows. He noticed that on Tuesdays, more customers would linger at the tables by the window, drinking their coffee slowly while listening to the music outside. As the sun started to set, the woman finally began to slow down. It was always something soft and peaceful, like a lullaby for the park itself. Then she would carefully close the piano lid, pack up her small bench, and wheel the instrument back the way she came. People would watch her leave, this mysterious woman, who had filled their Tuesday with beautiful music. Some called out "thank you" or "see you next week," but she would just smile and nod, saving her energy for the long walk home with her heavy piano. The next Tuesday, she was back. Same time, same spot, same old piano. And the Tuesday after that, word started to spread around the neighborhood. "There's this woman who plays piano in the park." People would tell their friends. "You have to come hear her," but nobody knew her name. Nobody knew where she lived or why she came to the park every week with her piano. Some people tried to start conversations with her, but she was always polite, yet private, preferring to let her music do the talking. The mystery only made her more interesting. Who was this woman? Why did she play such beautiful emotional music? And why did she never ask for anything in return? Theories started flying around the small community that had begun to form around her Tuesday performances. Maybe she was a retired music teacher who missed having students to play for. Maybe she had lost someone important, and music was how she remembered them. Maybe she was just lonely, and this was her way of connecting with other people. Whatever her story was, one thing was clear. She had turned an ordinary park into something special. Tuesday had become the day that regular park visitors looked forward to all week. The day when a mysterious woman with an old piano reminded everyone that sometimes the most beautiful gifts come from the most unexpected places. And as autumn approached, nobody could have guessed that this peaceful routine was building toward something that would change all of their lives forever. After 6 weeks of Tuesday performances, something beautiful was happening at Riverside Park. What started as curiosity about a mysterious piano player had grown into something much bigger. People were changing their schedules just to be there. When she arrived, the young mother with the stroller had become one of her most loyal listeners. Every Tuesday at 10:30, she would show up with her 2-year-old daughter, spreading a blanket on the grass about 15 feet from the piano. The little girl, who was usually restless and wanted to run around, would sit quietly and clap her tiny hands after each song. The mother had tried bringing her daughter to other activities, but nothing held the child's attention like the piano music. There was something about the way the elderly woman played that seemed to speak directly to children. Maybe it was the gentle way she moved her hands. Or maybe kids just knew when someone was playing from the heart. The war veteran had also become a regular. He never got too close to the crowd, preferring to stand under a nearby tree where he could listen without feeling trapped. For months after coming home, he had trouble being around groups of people, but somehow this felt different. The music created a bubble of peace around everyone. He found himself actually looking forward to Tuesdays one week. When the pianist was playing a particularly moving piece, he noticed tears running down his cheeks. It was the first time he had cried since returning home, and instead of feeling embarrassed, he felt relieved. The music was helping him process emotions he'd been carrying for too long. The elderly widow had started bringing more than just her folding chair. She packed a small picnic lunch and made it her weekly social event. At first, she just listened like everyone else. But gradually, she began chatting with other regular listeners. She hadn't realized how lonely she had become until she found herself looking forward to these conversations almost as much as the music. She particularly enjoyed talking to the young mother, sharing stories about what it was like raising children in a different generation. The music had given them a connection they never would have had otherwise. The coffee shop owner across the street had started timing his breaks to coincide with the performances. He would stand in his doorway, wiping down cups while listening to whatever the pianist was playing that day. His customers began commenting on the music too, asking if he knew anything about the woman who played. That's when he got an idea. The following Tuesday, he walked across the street with a free cup of coffee and a fresh pastry. He approached the piano carefully, not wanting to interrupt her playing. When she finished a song, he quietly placed the coffee and pastry on a small table he had brought from his shop. The pianist looked up at him with such genuine gratitude that it took him by surprise. She didn't say much, just a soft thank you and a smile that seemed to light up her whole face. But he could tell the gesture meant a lot to her. From that day forward, he made it a routine. Every Tuesday, fresh coffee and something to eat. Sometimes she would eat during her short breaks. Other times she would save it for later. But she always accepted the gifts with the same grateful smile. Word about the Tuesday piano performances started spreading beyond the regular park visitors. A local teacher heard about it from one of her students' parents and decided to bring her whole class for a field trip. 25 third graders walked over from the nearby elementary school. The pianist seemed delighted to have such a young audience. She played songs the children recognized, and then taught them to clap along with the rhythm. For 4 minutes, she had the complete attention of kids who usually couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes. Their teacher was amazed. Later, several parents asked if this was a regular event they could bring their children to. A teenager who had been dealing with depression stumbled upon the performances by accident. She had been having a particularly difficult day and was walking through the park to clear her head when she heard the music. Something about it made her stop and listen. The pianist was playing a piece that seemed to perfectly capture how the teenager was feeling, sad but hopeful at the same time. She found herself coming back week after week, always sitting in the same spot on a bench near the fountain. The music became her weekly therapy session. She started feeling stronger and more hopeful. A retired couple who had been married for 52 years discovered the performances when they were taking their usual afternoon walk. The husband had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and his wife was struggling to find activities they could still enjoy together. But when they listened to the piano music, something wonderful happened. The husband, who had been having trouble remembering recent events, would suddenly remember songs from their courtship and early marriage. He would hum along or squeeze his wife's hand when the pianist played something that reminded him of their wedding dance. His wife started requesting songs by humming melodies to the pianist during her breaks. The kind woman would nod and somehow always manage to play something close to what was requested. These musical moments became precious memories for the couple, islands of connection in an increasingly difficult journey. A nurse who worked the night shift at a nearby hospital began stopping by on her way home from work. She was always exhausted, but the music helped her transition from the stress of her job to the peace she needed to sleep during the day. She would sit in her car in the parking lot across from the park, windows down, letting the piano music wash away the tension from another difficult night. The park's maintenance crew started scheduling their work around the performances. They had noticed that the area around the piano was always left cleaner than the rest of the park. People seemed to respect the space more when the music was playing. Even teenagers, who usually left trash behind, would pick up after themselves on Tuesdays. The groundskeeper, who had been working at the park for over a decade, had never seen anything like the community that was forming. He started arriving early on Tuesdays just to watch people gather. There was something magical about seeing strangers become friends over their shared love of the music. He noticed how people would nod to each other in recognition, how the regular listeners had developed an unspoken courtesy about where to sit, so everyone could see and hear properly. Children would automatically quiet down when the music started. Adults would silence their phones without being asked. But the most remarkable thing was how the pianist seemed to sense what kind of music people needed. On gloomy days, she would play uplifting melodies that seemed to chase the clouds away. When the autumn leaves started falling, her music became more reflective and contemplative. If she noticed someone crying, she would play something comforting and healing. She rarely spoke to her audience, but her music communicated everything she needed to say. Through her playing, she was telling them that their feelings mattered, that they weren't alone, and that beauty could be found even in difficult times. None of them knew that these Tuesday gatherings were about to become even more precious, that the mysterious pianist was holding on to something she was afraid of losing forever. October had arrived with a crisp chill in the air, and the leaves in Riverside Park were turning brilliant shades of gold and red. It was the kind of autumn day that made people want to slow down and appreciate the beauty around them. But on this particular Tuesday, something felt different from the moment the elderly pianist arrived. Her regular listeners noticed it immediately. She was moving more slowly than usual, taking longer pauses to catch her breath as she wheeled her old piano to its familiar spot by the fountain. The young mother with the toddler watched with concern as the woman struggled more than normal to position the instrument just right. But it wasn't just her physical movements that seemed different. There was something in her expression, a kind of intensity that hadn't been there before. She looked like someone who had made an important decision, though none of her audience could guess what that might be. When she finally sat down at the piano bench, she didn't start playing right away, like she usually did. Instead, she sat quietly for several minutes, her hands resting on the keys, looking out at the small crowd that had gathered. Her eyes seemed to be memorizing each face, as if she was trying to capture this moment forever. The war veteran, standing in his usual spot under the oak tree, felt something shift in the atmosphere. After months of listening to her play, he had learned to read her moods through her music. Today felt heavier, more emotional than any Tuesday before, when she finally began to play. Everyone knew this performance would be special. The first song was something she had never played before, a haunting melody that seemed to reach right into people's hearts and squeeze. The elderly widow found herself gripping her folding chair, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't quite name. The coffee shop owner had brought her usual coffee and pastry, but when he approached the piano, she looked up at him with tears already forming in her eyes. She mouthed thank you in a way that sounded more like goodbye than her usual grateful acknowledgement. He backed away slowly, a worried feeling growing in his stomach. As the morning progressed, her playing became more intense and passionate than anyone had ever heard. She moved through pieces that told stories of love and loss, of hope and heartbreak, of memories that were precious beyond words. Each song seemed to flow into the next without pause, creating one long, continuous narrative of human experience. A teenager who had been coming for weeks to help with her depression noticed that the pianist's hands were trembling slightly between songs. But when those same hands touched the keys, they became steady and sure, as if the music itself was giving her strength. A small crowd of newcomers had gathered, drawn by word of mouth about the Tuesday piano performances, but even they could sense that something extraordinary was happening. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Children instinctively moved closer to their parents. Everyone seemed to understand that they were witnessing something important around noon. She began playing pieces that many people recognized but had never heard her perform before. There was Chopin's Prelude in E minor, so achingly beautiful that several people in the audience began crying openly. Then she moved into a Bach piece that seemed to speak of both struggle and triumph, her fingers dancing across the keys with breathtaking skill. The retired couple, where the husband was dealing with dementia, had positioned themselves on their usual bench. But today, something remarkable happened. The husband, who had been having more and more difficulty recognizing familiar things, suddenly began humming along perfectly with a song his wife hadn't heard him remember in months. She held his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face as she realized this might be one of their last shared musical memories. The nurse who usually listened from her car had parked and walked into the park today. Something about the music made her feel like she needed to be closer, to be part of whatever was happening. She found herself standing with people she had only observed from a distance, all of them united by the powerful emotions flowing from the piano. As the afternoon wore on, the pianist's stamina seemed endless. Usually, she would take short breaks. Sip water, stretch her fingers. But today she played for hours without stopping, as if she was trying to fit a lifetime of music into a single performance. The groundskeeper had abandoned his usual maintenance tasks and was watching from behind a nearby tree. In all his years working at the park, he had never seen anything like this. The woman was pouring her entire soul into the music, and everyone present could feel it. Children who normally got restless after a few songs sat quietly on the grass for hours. Adults who had planned to listen for just a few minutes found themselves canceling afternoon appointments. Something was happening that was bigger than any of them, and nobody wanted to leave. As the sun started to sink lower in the sky, painting the park in golden light, The pianist began what everyone would later remember as the most powerful part of her performance. She started playing hymns and spiritual songs, but in a way that transcended any particular religion or belief system. The music spoke to something universal in the human experience. When she launched into Amazing Grace, her playing was so powerful and emotional that it seemed to echo off every tree and building around the park. People who lived blocks away would later say they heard the music from their homes and felt compelled to step outside and listen. The song built and swelled, with the pianist putting every ounce of her strength and skill into each note. Her hands moved across the keys with a combination of technical mastery and raw emotion that left everyone breathless. It was the kind of performance that people would remember for the rest of their lives as the last notes of Amazing Grace faded into the evening air. Complete silence fell over the park. Not even the birds were singing. The pianist sat with her hands still on the keys, tears streaming down her face, breathing heavily from the exertion of such an intense performance. Then she did something she had never done before. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, she placed it carefully on top of the piano and weighted it down with a small stone she picked up from the ground. Nearby, the crowd watched in puzzled silence as she stood up slowly, taking one last long look at all their faces. She seemed to be trying to memorize this moment, to capture the sight of all these people who had become so important to her over the past few months. She began packing up her piano with unusual care, folding her bench precisely and making sure everything was secure for the journey home. Several people started to approach, wanting to ask if she was okay, wanting to thank her for the incredible performance they had just witnessed, but something in her demeanor kept them at a respectful distance. This felt like a private moment, something sacred that shouldn't be interrupted. As she wheeled her piano away into the gathering dusk, she turned back once to wave goodbye. In that gesture, everyone felt it, a finality that made their hearts sink even though they couldn't understand why. The folded paper remained on the ground where she had left it, weighted down by the small stone, waiting to reveal a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about their mysterious Tuesday pianist. Wednesday morning arrived gray and quiet at Riverside Park. The groundskeeper arrived for work earlier than usual, unable to shake the feeling that something important had happened the day before. The intensity of yesterday's piano performance had stayed with him all night, replaying in his mind like a song he couldn't forget as he walked toward the fountain area to begin his daily routine. He noticed the small piece of paper still sitting where the elderly pianist had left it. The stone was still holding it in place, exactly as she had positioned it before wheeling her piano away into the evening shadows. He had thought about the note all night, wondering if he should read it or leave it alone. Maybe she had just forgotten it. Maybe she would come back for it today, even though it wasn't Tuesday. But something deep in his gut told him this wasn't an accident. Standing over the folded paper, he hesitated for several long minutes. Reading someone else's private note felt wrong, but what if it was important? What if she needed help? Working at the park for so many years, he had developed an instinct about people, and everything about yesterday had felt like a goodbye. Finally, his concern for the elderly woman won out over his respect for privacy. With careful hands, he moved the stone aside and unfolded the paper. What he read made his knees weak, and he had to sit down on the nearest bench to steady himself. The letter was written in neat, careful handwriting that showed the shakiness of aging hands. It began simply, "To my dear friends at Riverside Park, the family I never expected to find." As he read further, tears began forming in his eyes. The woman explained that her name was Rose, and she was 71 years old. She had been coming to the park not just to play music, but because she was facing the most frightening chapter of her life. 6 months earlier, doctors had told her she was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis had hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and changing everything she thought she knew about her future. Music had been her entire life, and the thought of losing her ability to play was more terrifying than death itself. The letter revealed that Rose had been a professional pianist in her younger years. She had played in concert halls and fancy hotels, had made recordings and performed with orchestras. Music wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. Every song was a piece of her soul, every melody a memory she had carefully preserved. But life had taken unexpected turns. She had given up her performing career to care for her sick mother, then later for her husband when he developed cancer. She had worked as a piano teacher for 30 years, sharing her love of music with hundreds of students who had filled her life with joy and purpose. Now, at 71, she was completely alone. Her husband had died 3 years ago, and they had never been able to have children. Her students had grown up and moved on with their lives. The Alzheimer's diagnosis had felt like a final, cruel joke from a universe that had already taken everything she loved. The groundskeeper wiped his eyes and continued reading, his heart breaking with every line. Rose explained that she had started coming to the park because she could feel her musical abilities beginning to slip away. Some days, she would sit at her home piano and find herself forgetting pieces she had played perfectly for 50 years. Other days, her fingers wouldn't cooperate the way they used to, stumbling over passages that had once been as natural as breathing. The Tuesday Park performances had become her way of holding onto her musical self while she still could. Every song was a battle against the disease that was slowly stealing her mind. Every note was a small victory in a war she knew she couldn't win. But something unexpected had happened during those months of playing in the park. The small community that had formed around her music had given her something she thought she had lost forever, a sense of purpose and belonging. She wrote about watching the young mother and her toddler, the child's innocent joy and clapping. Along had reminded her why she fell in love with music in the first place. She mentioned the war veteran who stood under the oak tree, how she had chosen certain pieces, specifically because she hoped they might bring him some peace. The elderly widow had become especially dear to her, Rose wrote. Seeing another woman navigating loss and loneliness had made her feel less alone in the world. The simple act of playing music that brought comfort to someone else's grief had given her own sorrow a purpose. She thanked the coffee shop owner for his daily kindness, explaining that those small gestures of care had meant more to her than he could ever know. In a world where she felt increasingly invisible and forgotten, his attention had reminded her that she still mattered to someone. The letter went on to describe how each regular listener had touched her life in ways they probably never realized. The teenager dealing with depression had reminded her that music could still heal, even when the person playing it was broken. The retired couple fighting dementia together had shown her that love could survive even the cruelest diseases. Rose wrote that she had made the decision to enter a memory care facility where she could receive proper care as her condition progressed. She was terrified of becoming a burden to anyone, and she wanted to face this final challenge with as much dignity as possible. But before she disappeared from their lives, she had needed one last performance. Tuesday's emotional concert had been her way of saying goodbye to the part of herself that could still play music perfectly. It had been her gift to the community that had given her so much joy in her darkest months. The most heartbreaking part of the letter came near the end. Rose admitted that she was scared of what lay ahead. She was afraid of the day when she wouldn't remember how to play piano, or worse, wouldn't remember the beautiful Tuesdays they had all shared together. She asked her Park family not to be sad for her, but to remember that music had connected them all in a way that went beyond words. She hoped that even after she was gone, they would continue to find ways to bring music and joy to each other's lives. The letter ended with the address of the memory care facility where she was staying, and a final request, if anyone wanted to visit. She would love to see familiar faces from her Tuesday family, at least while she still remembered who they were. The groundskeeper sat in stunned silence after finishing the letter, tears streaming down his face. This woman who had brought so much beauty into their lives was facing an unimaginable battle, and she had been doing it completely alone. He looked around the empty park, thinking about all the people who would want to know about this letter. The young mother, the veteran, the widow, the coffee shop owner, the teenager, the nurse, the retired couple, and dozens of others who had been touched by Rose's music. They deserved to know the truth about their mysterious pianist. More importantly, Rose deserved to know how much her gift had meant to all of them. She didn't have to face this journey alone. not when she had unknowingly created a family that would never forget her. The groundskeeper carefully folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He had work to do. He needed to find everyone who had been part of Rose's Tuesday audience and share her story. This community she had created through music was about to prove just how powerful those connections really were. The groundskeeper didn't waste any time. By Thursday morning, he had made copies of Rose's letter and began the difficult task of finding everyone who had been part of her Tuesday audience. He started with the coffee shop owner, since he knew exactly where to find him. When the coffee shop owner read the letter, his face went through a range of emotions. First shock, then sadness, and finally a determined look that the groundskeeper recognized immediately. This man wasn't going to let Rose face her battle alone. Within hours, the coffee shop had become an unofficial headquarters for what people started calling Rose's Army. The owner put up a sign in his window that simply said, "If you knew the Tuesday piano lady, please come in. We need to talk." The response was overwhelming. By Friday afternoon, more than 40 people had stopped by the coffee shop after seeing the sign. The young mother came in with tears in her eyes, saying she had been wondering all week why she felt so sad. The war veteran showed up looking shaken but determined to help. The elderly widow arrived with a notebook, already making lists of what they could do. The teenager who had found comfort in Rose's music brought her parents, explaining how much those Tuesday performances had meant to her recovery from depression. The nurse came straight from her night shift, still in her scrubs, saying she had to do something to help the woman who had given her so much peace. The retired couple came together, the husband having one of his clearer days where he remembered exactly who Rose was and why her music had been so important to them. His wife held his hand tightly as they listened to the letter being read aloud for the newcomers. As word spread through the neighborhood, more and more people came forward with their own stories about how Rose's music had touched their lives. A construction worker admitted he had started taking his lunch breaks at the park just to listen. A busy executive confessed she had been late to important meetings because she couldn't tear herself away from the performances. The coffee shop. Ono had to move tables around to accommodate all the people who wanted to help. Someone brought a large poster board, and they started making plans. The first priority was visiting Rose, but they wanted to do more than that. They wanted to honor the gift she had given them and make sure her legacy lived on. The young mother suggested they start a fund to buy a permanent piano for the park. The war veteran, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, suddenly spoke up with passion, saying they needed to continue the Tuesday performances. The music couldn't stop just because Rose could no longer play. By Saturday, they had raised enough money not just for a piano, but for a beautiful, weather-resistant instrument that could stay in the park year-round. The piano company, when they heard the story, donated a bench and agreed to provide free tuning and maintenance. But the most important mission was finding Rose and letting her know she wasn't alone. The groundskeeper had called the memory care facility, and the staff had confirmed that Rose was there and was allowed visitors. They also mentioned that she had been very quiet and sad since arriving, spending most of her time staring out the window. On Sunday, a small group made the first visit. The young mother, the coffee shop owner, the elderly widow, and the groundskeeper drove to the facility together, bringing flowers and a photo album they had quickly put together of the park and the piano spot where Rose had played. When they walked into Rose's room, she was sitting by the window, looking frail but dignified in a simple blue dress. When she saw them, her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "You came. You actually came." The next hour was filled with stories, tears, and laughter. Rose told them about her concert days, about the students she had taught, and about how much their Tuesday gatherings had meant to her. She was having a good day mentally, remembering everyone clearly and asking about people who hadn't been able to come. The young mother showed Rose a video on her phone of her toddler clapping and dancing to music, explaining how Rose had taught her daughter to love piano music. The elderly widow shared how the Tuesday performances had helped her through the loneliness after her husband's death. Rose listened to every story with wonder, as if she couldn't believe her music had meant so much to so many people. When they told her about the plans for a permanent piano in the park, she broke down crying, saying it was more than she had ever dreamed of. Over the following weeks, visitors came in steady streams. The teenager brought her guitar and played some of the songs Rose had performed. Though she admitted they didn't sound nearly as beautiful, the retired couple came with the husband's old harmonica, and he played along while Rose hummed melodies she could still remember. The war veteran surprised everyone by signing up for piano lessons. He told Rose he wanted to learn her favorite piece so he could play it at the park in her honor. Even on her difficult days when her memory was foggy, the mention of music would bring a smile to her face. The coffee shop owner started bringing lunch to the facility every Sunday, turning it into a weekly gathering where Rose's Park family could visit together. The facility staff said they had never seen a patient receive so much love and attention from the community. Meanwhile, work progressed on the park memorial. The new piano arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 3 months after Rose's final performance. The whole neighborhood turned out for the dedication ceremony. A small plaque was installed that read, "In honor of Rose, who taught us that music shared is love multiplied." The Tuesday performances continued just as the war veteran had insisted they should. Different people took turns playing, and while no one could match Rose's skill, the spirit of community and connection remained strong. Children still came to listen and clap. Adults still found comfort in the music after difficult days. Rose was brought to see the memorial piano on one of her better days. She ran her fingers over the keys gently, playing a short, simple melody that brought tears to everyone's eyes. It wasn't as complex as her old performances, but it was filled with the same love that had started everything. The story of Rose and her park family spread beyond the neighborhood. Local newspapers picked it up, then radio stations, and eventually national news outlets. People from other cities started their own park music programs. Inspired by what had happened at Riverside Park, music therapy programs at hospitals and nursing homes received donations from people who had heard Rose's story, piano teachers across the country reported an increase in adult students who said they wanted to learn, because they had been inspired by the elderly woman who played in the park. But for the people who had known Rose personally, the real miracle wasn't the publicity or the programs that sprang up elsewhere. It was the way she had transformed a group of strangers into a family, connected by something deeper than blood or friendship. Rose lived for 2 more years, with good days and bad days, but always surrounded by love from her chosen family. Even on the days when she couldn't remember their names, she would smile when they played music for her, some part of her soul still, recognizing the melodies that had brought them all together. When Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning, her funeral was held in the park, with her memorial piano as the centerpiece. Hundreds of people came, many of whom had never met her, but had been touched by her story. The Tuesday performances continue to this day, played by volunteers who understand they're not just making music, but honoring the memory of a woman who proved that it's never too late to find family, never too late to make a difference, and never too late to leave the world a little more beautiful than you found it. Rose's piano still sits by the fountain, and on quiet Tuesday mornings, if you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of her music in the wind, reminding everyone who passes by that love and music are the only things that truly last forever.